Welcome back, friends. And just to let you know, it's already out on MGO Blue Podcast, a radio replay of Inside Michigan Football. My guests on Monday night were Sherrone Moore, head coach. We'll have him every week. Davis Warren, he rounds out the show. And right in the middle, we got the offensive coordinator, Kirk Campbell. A Defend the Block with Brian Bush. LJ Kaysen, a freshman on the men's basketball team, joined Brian this week. Still to come on Conquering Heroes. I was able to sit down with hockey head coach Brendan Naurato, and we've got the keys to the game as well as a little bit of a locker room speech. That's Thursday on In the Trenches, Thursday at 5. So we're going to give you a little bit more time to get ready for this week's game against Arkansas State, as we are all season long with those. But at this time, I want to bring in my partner, Mr. Brian Bush. Brian, how you doing, bud?
I'm good, John. Some unfortunate news that affects the game day experience at the University of Michigan. The great James Earl Jones passing away. I'll tell you, as a kid growing up, as a big baseball fan, watching Field of Dreams, watching Sandlot.
Yeah.
I know that's not probably his Field of Dreams probably is, but Sandlot's probably not super high up there. But that one for me was one of my first exposures to him. And of course, the introduction video at the Big House.
Yeah.
It would be good without James Earl Jones, but it would not be great. It is great because of his voice, his presence, his passion for the university. So our thoughts go out to his friends, his family, and the Michigan community. That's an iconic individual who unfortunately is no longer with us.
Yeah, it was sad news when I heard that yesterday. And, some of those movies, and if you're talking about Darth Vader's voice, like they're movies that multiple generations are now enjoying. And when you talk about Sandlot, it may not be the headliner of his IMDb account, but that's one that I grew up watching, you grew up watching. And the fact that now my youngest son, Teddy, that is one of his absolute favorite movies. And he was a movie icon and certainly an icon in Ann Arbor and in the Big House.
No doubt. Obviously, no easy way to transition, but we will get into our 7 from 77. Obviously, not a fun Saturday afternoon at the Big House. For all the excitement, the enthusiasm, the game itself did not play out the way that I think many expected or hoped for in Ann Arbor. Let's just start with a broad perspective from Saturday. How much of that game was Texas and a Longhorns team that has, I think, the understandable aspirations for all of college football's biggest prizes, and how much of it was Michigan? I know it was both, but if you could try to measure it in some way, shape, or form, how much is there to fix for Michigan? And also, how far is there to go? Because Texas is now, in 2024, Texas is one of the measuring sticks in college football.
They are. And honestly, all you do is need a seat at the table in the college football playoffs. And if Michigan's going to do that, there's a lot to fix. But getting to your question, how much of it was Texas? And I hate to give a percentage or anything because I don't want to take away from what Texas did, but I also don't want to give Michigan more credit than they deserve because they were bad. This is a very good Texas team. Offensive line, wide receiver core, quarterback. Obviously, I mean, it put Quinn Ewers in the lead position for the Heisman Trophy. And their defense was as solid a defense as you're going to find. The speed on the edges, the way that they were able to get after, our quarterback, Davis Warren. I think the majority of it was Texas is a damn good football team, and they're well coached. They came in here ready to win the game. On the backside of that, Michigan did themselves no favors. And from, the very first possession, Texas goes down and gives a gift to Michigan where one of the third downs that they weren't able to convert was because of a penalty, and it happened to be a touchdown that was brought back. They couldn't convert, and so they got to kick a field goal. With a very reliable field goal kicker, they miss. Michigan was able to get away on that first possession with no harm, no foul. Then Michigan goes out, and there's a procedure penalty. So you're 1st and 15. You don't find a way to convert. It's 3 and out, and now you're giving the ball right back to Texas. And when we talk, one of the keys that we had was, again, in this game, you've got to win time of possession. You can't do that when you give a team extra possessions, and those came even later with turnovers, more 3 and outs. you've offensively, you've got to be able to convert on third down, extend possessions to give your defense a little bit of a break. Now, it's not all that, but defensively, if you can't get off the field, they were 8 of 10 in the first half on converting third downs. If you can't get off the field defensively, it makes for a long day, which we all had in the big house.
Yeah, time of possession, a little misleading for the full 60 minutes, but it was 19-11 in the first half. You alluded to the 8 of 10 third downs. Just can't have it. Number 2 on our 7 from 77. Let's dig into your film watch from this one. We talked about it some Saturday, but now that you've had a chance to look back, areas of biggest concern from what you saw from Saturday against the Longhorns.
Well, and this gets back into, was it Texas or was it Michigan? And again, all credit to Texas. They came in and they performed at a very high level. But I think the biggest surprise was Michigan's defense, that you've got 3 guys on that defense that are projected to be first-round talents and other guys that could eke into the first round but are day 1 or day 2 draft picks. So the talent is there defensively, but it felt more like you had a group that was a whole bunch of individuals that were trying to make plays. And the effort was there, but you've got to play really good team defense. You can have all the studs in the world. If you're not playing as a group and trusting your teammates, you're not going to be able to play to the level that you should be at. And this is a team with returners on defense, not many on offense, that we all knew coming into the season was going to have to be a defensive-led team, especially early in the season if they're going to stay in some of these games, Texas being the biggest highlight. And that was the biggest surprise to me. The fix on offense has to start up front. You've got to find a way to be able to run the football. And yes, it falls on a lot of different things. It's play call, it's execution from the running back, it's a lot of different things. But the offensive line has to find a way to gel as a unit. And just like I mentioned, the defense playing as individuals, when you have guys up front that it only takes one to mess things up, and now all of a sudden you get a free runner or you get penetration in the run game, and it kills everything. Penetration is 100% will kill any type of run scheme. It doesn't matter if it's zone, power, gap. It doesn't matter. It will kill the run scheme, and you've got to find a way to get movement and play as a group up front.
Number 3 on our 7 from 77, the final offensive drive, Michigan showed some things. Now, it was garbage time. Texas certainly didn't have its full complement of players, probably its full enthusiasm, but just structurally play calling, Davis Warren more as a running threat. What can Michigan take from that looking ahead to this week and beyond?
Well, I think you look at the first completion that Davis Warren had in the game. It was a rollout to the right, and he found Colston Loveland. Now, that in and of itself, that matchup, that connection, we needed to see more of that. But I think Davis Warren can be really good getting outside the pocket, and it does a couple of things for me, because you saw at the end of the game, now he was getting outside the pocket because he was under extreme duress, but if it's a designed quarterback rollout, a naked bootleg, any way you want to do it or call it, it gives Davis Warren a better view downfield, an uncluttered view to be able to, as a young, inexperienced quarterback, to go through his reads. It gives him a little bit of extra time. He can get out there because he has the speed. He's got the athletic ability. He can throw on the run, but he can also set his feet up and not be pressured. It also allows the offensive line the opportunity to come off the ball and be a little bit more aggressive. You could put a tight end backside that's going to hold that backside end in. You lose a target downfield, but they can always leak out late. It cleans things up for protection, makes things, they could be aggressive and come off the ball and get a rhythm going, gain some confidence, so that when they are in some of those 3, 5, 7-step drops, maybe they feel a little bit more comfortable and it's not as dire, and you can also be more effective at creating wins on first and second down. And if you're not getting him in the run game, the goal is to be able to get to third and short. So that's anything less than 3 yards. And if you're always third and long, 3rd and 5, 6, 7 plus, that's another stress on an offensive line that's still trying to figure things out.
Our fourth question here on our 7 from 77 on In the Trenches, presented by Meyer. Sherrone Moore has experienced a ton during his time as a head coach. We all remember what took place in State College, winning against Ohio State as the acting head coach. This is his first time going through a week where the team's coming off a loss. So how do you think he handled Saturday, and how has he handled the week so far in your eyes?
Well, as best as you can. And, I love his comments about this should hurt. It does hurt. And it's an experience that these guys haven't had in some time. And some of the sophomores have never experienced it. They're looking around to see how is the head coach going to handle a loss, because we didn't see that last year. Now, all of a sudden you have one, and it was in a marquee top 10 matchup. It was at home, which is, you even go back further as to the last time that they lost at home. And it's troubling. And will be to these players, but it's not the end of the season. There are still going to be 10 more games that are going to be played. You're going to have, 6 more at home. So you've got to find a way to recover. It's still going to hurt. You got to watch that film. It's going to be painful, but you've got to use it as a learning tool. And I think he's done a great job of setting the tone that our season's not over, but there are massive improvements that we need to make. And it all starts individually. It starts with me, meaning Sherrone Moore. It starts with our assistant coaches of putting the players in position to be successful, giving them the information, knowledge, and the reps at practice that they need so that they're comfortable going out there on game day. And then ultimately, it's the individuals that have to take on responsibility for assignment, responsibility for technique, responsibility for execution. And then once you start doing that, you start develop that trust that you need up front offensively, that you need in the secondary, that you need as a team defense. All of those things will start to develop, but it has to start with individual accountability.
If you haven't listened to it either live or on the podcast feed, the Inside Michigan Football Radio Show, some really interesting insight from Sherrone Moore. Really enjoyed the conversation with Davis Warren, the quarterback. He was our final guest on Monday night because, you can only answer so much, but I thought the answers were good and pointed and pretty firm. This is going to be a unique week around the program. Number 5 on our 7 from 77. We'll get your keys on Thursday's episode of In the Trenches, but just when it comes to what you want to see from Michigan, this feels like one of those games on Saturday where it's about Michigan, not so much about Arkansas State. A proud program, one that I think is, again, closer probably to Fresno State than some of the 22 and 23 non-conference foes that Michigan faced. But things you want to see from Michigan that can be potentially transferable getting ready for USC a week from Saturday.
It's some of the things that I already mentioned that were concerning on Saturday against Texas, and that is better team defense and understanding where your strengths are. We know Will Johnson is a strength. We know Mason Graham is a strength. We know that front four should be a strength. So you should be able to make a team one-dimensional and cut the run game off. You should be able to count on Will Johnson to cover a third of the field and eliminate things on that side, which will allow you to roll safety help over the top to, maybe a corner or a nickel that may need, some help. Maybe it's pulling back on some of the blitzes. I know you are preparing to beat Arkansas State, but ultimately you're putting things in place to compete in the Big Ten, and that first Big Ten opponent is USC. So it's pressure up front, being able to win with 4, and that was one of the keys to the game, and I was surprised that we weren't able to do that. So you've got to find ways to win up front, win those individual matchups, and be the threats that you're, quote unquote, projected to be. And then offensively, develop an identity. Is this going to be a run team? Is this going to be a pass team? Is it going to be a physical team? Is it going to be a team that is going to need to use tempo or different things? None of those things are wrong. You just have to find out what this team is going to be able to do well. And then really honestly, you've got to find 2 or 3 run plays that these guys can block with their eyes closed. No matter what the front is, no matter who is across from you, find 2 or 3 run plays that when they're dialed up, you're going to get a minimum of 3 yards. And it's confidence with the backs, knowing the offensive line is going to be where they're supposed to be, when they're supposed to be there, picking up the defensive linemen, picking up the linebackers, corners off the edge, all of those things. You've got to find those so that you have some confidence plays and some confidence pass plays as well. I mentioned the bootleg that Davis Warren was able to find Colston Loveland. that should be a go-to every single time. Where if we need to gain some confidence in our quarter, we just want an easy completion. What are those, protections that we know we can ace? What are the routes we know that we can ace? And that it gives us options for the quarter, easy options. Hey, 1, 2, 3, going through the progressions. And if it's not there, I dump it off to a running back that can do something with it in space.
Before we continue our 7 from 77, our friends over at Big Boy are offering a great deal when the Wolverines defense delivers 2 or more sacks in a game.
That's right, Brian. Who doesn't love the old Big Boy? Every time Michigan's defense comes up with 2 or more sacks, Michigan fans can enjoy 50% off all appetizers at participating Big Boy locations on Monday. From crispy onion rings to their legendary mozzarella sticks, Big Boy will be the place to be on Mondays if the Wolverines deliver 2 or more sacks for 50% off appetizers. They're bringing the game to your plate at Big Boy.
All right, number 6 on our 7 from 77. Other games in the week 2 realm. We'll start in the Big Ten. Ohio State and USC pitching shutouts. Buckeyes 56-0 over Western Michigan. Better performance from them versus week 1, whereas USC takes down Utah State 48-0. Not a whole lot to glean from either of those in my eyes. Did you take anything significantly away from those 2 games?
Not really. I mean, there's not a lot that you can gain. It was the first shutout for Ohio State since 2019. And we all know they've been highly publicized as one of the better defensive fronts in all of college football. And they have gone out there and shown exactly why the early season prognosticators were saying that.
Oregon and Penn State each eke out home wins. Certainly one against a team that's considered to be much better than the other. I really like Bowling Green's chances in the MAC, but the MAC isn't quite the Mountain West right now. Penn State with the 34-27 win, and Bowling Green didn't trail that game until well into the second half. Whereas, Boise State, they were oh so close to, I think, really opening up the potential of a group of 5 team, maybe earning a bye if things go well with the rest of their season. Oregon wins it at the buzzer 37-34. Neither team has looked all that great. When we talk about style points and rankings and all of that, it doesn't matter if you go win your league. That's one difference in the 12-team playoff versus the 4-team. But if you don't win your league, you kind of need, as folks in South Bend can attest, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, you need to take care of business and probably do so emphatically. Plenty of opportunities for both those teams, but not necessarily what you expect from Oregon or Penn State early.
No, and honestly, my takeaway from this is I don't think people, if Penn State, say they have 1 or 2 losses and you look back and say, well, they struggled against Bowling Green. I don't know that that's going to be a detriment when we're talking about who's making the college football playoffs down the road. And the same thing with Oregon. Now, it is interesting. Oregon has struggled 2 weeks in a row. And maybe it's just the state of Idaho that they struggle with. But on the flip side, I'm kind of intrigued by what I saw from Boise State. Boise State could be that non-Power 4 conference champ that gets the automatic bid. And are they putting together, I think the benefit for them of taking Oregon to the wire and ultimately losing by a field goal in the final seconds, it's more of a benefit to them that if they do win the Mountain West and maybe there's a one-loss ACC champ, does the Mountain West champ in Boise State jump into one of those top 4 spots? So I think it's more of a benefit for them than it is a detriment to Oregon. The ultimate goal is obviously just to win the game, and they both were able to accomplish that.
And then in Power 4 non-conference matchups involving the Big Ten, if you include Michigan's loss to Texas, the Big Ten goes 2-3. The wins, Nebraska rolling Colorado 28-10. It really wasn't that close. Illinois knocks off a good Kansas team 23-17 in Champaign. The losses, that Cy-Hawk Trophy rivalry is, they always have some really unique to Iowa type football games. The Cyclones winning it at Kinnick 20-19 and Duke winning over Northwestern in double overtime. My biggest takeaway from all of this, Nebraska, maybe they're refreshed. They've got a quarterback that has certainly a high ceiling. I don't think Colorado's all that great, obviously, but through 2 weeks, when you're looking at one of those teams that wasn't expected to really be in the conversation, who's jumped up to at least say, hey, pay attention to us, I think it's pretty clearly Nebraska.
Nebraska and Illinois. Illinois had a much worse season than I had projected them to have last year, but now it's the second year of Drew Altmaier at the quarterback position. Defensively, especially in the secondary, they have been as good in the country as you're going to find, especially when you look at the guys that have been drafted out of that Illinois secondary over the past 3, 4, 5 years. They've put a lot of talent in the NFL. So I think both of those teams, they're probably bummed that they didn't have this resurgence or these type of seasons when the Big Ten was still in divisions, but they're going to be teams that you have to account for, and they are going to beat some good teams when they finally get into Big Ten play.
No doubt. Number 7 on our 7 from 77, some national storylines. I alluded to the MACtion that took place in South Bend, the MAC's first ever top 5 win. Northern Illinois stunning the Irish 16-14. I mean, we were talking about it this time last week of what a great win for Notre Dame going to Texas A&M, one of their few true tests of the season. Now, boy, it feels like they have to run the table in order to make the playoff at 11-1 because of this.
Yeah, and I don't think this eliminates them from playoff contention, but they obviously don't have, because they're not in a conference. They don't have the auto bid. And they, you look at the schedule and what are they going to do against Memphis? What are they going to do when they play? Stanford is somewhat of a rivalry game, but nobody thinks Stanford's a threat. But ultimately, it's that last game of the year where they're going to have to make an emphatic statement against USC, and they need USC to have a good Big Ten season so that game has more importance, more eyeballs, more juice to it than really anything else. But I don't think it eliminates them, but it was nice not to be the biggest story over the weekend.
Yeah.
If that's something you can hang your hat on.
It was really revealing when we were in the booth late in the fourth quarter on Saturday, and we did all have to kind of go through the logistics of, hey, so how do we do this? Which is a good, it shows how good it's been. But yeah, we hadn't experienced a loss in a while, but this one, and Notre Dame doesn't have that outlet of a potential conference championship to bail them out. And to Notre Dame's credit, they've played a lot of tough schedules over the years, and they try to schedule. Yeah. They're not scheduling a bunch of group of fives all the time. This year, just the schedule worked out to where it's not all that great.
No, but this is also, yeah, and this is also one of those things. We talked about it last week, going to College Station and playing Texas A&M, a true freshman left tackle, of sophomores across the board on the offensive line. They're replacing a lot of talent up front. This is a very young team, and that's the wild card that is coaching in college. When you have a young and inexperienced team, and I know people will probably say, well, why are you making excuses for Notre Dame? It's not an excuse. It's a fact that, they probably thought maybe they were a little better than they were. And that happens when you have a young team like Notre Dame, where maybe they started to read the headlines just a little bit. This will be a refocus moment. It's a tough lesson to learn. You don't want to learn it at home. We've had these moments before with App State, with Toledo, so we know what it feels like. And hopefully this is a moment for Marcus Freeman and those young players to say, you know what, whether this pays off this year in regards to very hard lessons learned, I'm sure it'll be something that these players will learn from throughout the course of their remainder, their time in South Bend.
And again, so much goes back to an unknown of how the committee, led by Michigan Athletic Director Ward Manuel, will handle the 12-team playoff. And Notre Dame, it's 1 of 1. That's a unique circumstance, and this is a unique start to the season, that's for sure. In the SEC, some blowouts for most of the top 10 teams: Georgia, Ole Miss, Missouri. Alabama, the score looks better than it actually went. They were only up by 1 on South Florida after 3 quarters before pulling away in the final 15 minutes. Then Tennessee blasted NC State 51-10 in Charlotte, and the only other top 25 matchup in college football outside of Ann Arbor. Any thoughts from an SEC that, again, as we start talking about ACC and Big 12, we'll see how many bids they can get. Notre Dame suffers a big loss. And, the second tier for the Big 10, the Penn States of the world, and I put Oregon in the top tier at the start of the year. They haven't looked great. the SEC figures right now through week 2, very small sample size, to be in the best position from a playoff standpoint.
Sure, they're getting really good quarterback play. When you think about Tennessee, Nico, and I'm going to see if I can get this right, Amali Ava. I won't say it fast, but I think he has shown why he was a highly rated recruit. He has shown up, and I think he's really put Tennessee into a position of, I don't know that there were many, if any, putting Tennessee in the playoffs. I don't know if they ultimately reach that because of the schedule that they're going to play, but they're a team much like, but better than a Nebraska or an Illinois that is going to beat somebody big in the SEC. They're a team that you have to account for, and he's a talent that you're going to have to certainly account for.
All right. That is our 7 from 77. Before we get to Makari Page on our audio version of In the Trenches and a top 5 list on the video stream, the top 5 players who can elevate Michigan past this loss to better performances. We'll have that coming up. We got to tell you about Meijer, the presenting sponsor of In the Trenches, the 2024 Michigan football season, and John, hundreds of teams across the Midwest.
And what they want to let you know, with your help, we all can provide meals to our hungry neighbors through Simply Give. With just $10, you can provide meals to local pantries serving families in need. Look for Simply Give donation cards at checkouts or online. Together, we can provide a helping hand for those in need. Join us in our mission to help feed our hungry neighbors, because whenever you shop Meijer, you help people in your community to work, to play, to live, and to learn. Learn more at MeijerCommunity.com. Meijer is a proud supporter and fan of the 2024 Michigan football season.
All right. On audio, here's Makari Page. And on video, we're talking about top 5 players who can elevate Michigan, pretty open-ended. And we certainly encourage those who are watching to get in some questions, get in some thoughts. We will share some comments throughout the rest of the stream here. And again, we're back every Tuesday. Hit that like button, subscribe to Michigan Athletics on YouTube, retweet or re-X or repost on X at John Jansen 77. But we wanted to kind of break down, okay, who are the potential, we hear the phrase level jumpers, guys who can, whether it's individually or a unit, whatever, kind of push forward a team. So we might have had different thought processes, and based on our list, there's certainly a few that we had some disagreements on. But John, let's start out with your number 5 player who can elevate Michigan here to try to bounce back from this and move forward.
Well, and before we even start on the top 5 list, and we may have some disagreements who are on this list, and you can see my number 5 is Davis Warren. I think Michigan has plenty of guys that can step up and be a part of fixing where Michigan is right now. And for me, some people will say maybe quarterback should be number 1. I've got him at 5 right now because he's very dependent on a lot of guys around him. But the quarterback has to be a leader on this team, even if they're not a captain. I've experienced this many times throughout my career where the quarterback's not the captain of the team, but when they're out there and they're managing the game, they're calling the plays, they're running the offense, they are the de facto leader of the offense. They're the guy that everybody's looking to. And it's about composure on the field. And I think Davis Warren has done a good job of composure on the field, but it's about conversations in the locker room. It's about conversations in the weight room and different things that are happening from Sunday to Friday before you even get to the stadium on Saturday, that Davis Warren, sure, his play could be better, but it's all about elevating the talent of those guys around you, making your receivers better. And sometimes it's conversations. We saw, and we talked to Davis Warren on Monday night about this. You've got to be able to trust your receivers that when there's a blitz coming, and there was one in 4th down where they were able to convert. That didn't happen in the first game against Fresno State. It happened in this one. So those conversations are happening. He's got a free runner in his face. He knows he's going to take a hit. He holds on to it as long as possible, but the receiver has to be looking for the ball. Sometimes you got to cut those routes off short. Davis Warren has to continue to develop the chemistry with the receivers, with the back, with the offensive line, because he's the leader of the offense when the game is underway.
All right, for my number 5, this is kind of a broad, full unit discussion, but to me, if we're talking about individuals who can make a big time play, Tyler Morris. We saw him in the Rose Bowl come up with, I think, one of the most athletic, the speediest plays of that national championship run last season. Texas, 2 catches, 17 yards. Fresno State, 3 catches, 15 yards. It's not all him by any stretch, but Michigan has an opportunity to rectify, to work on some things in the pass game this week. And we saw a few plays down the stretch from Samaj Morgan. Tyler Morris has that type of upside. I feel like he has the chance to, in these, bigger league games, once we get into conference play, USC coming up a week from Saturday, all of that, he has that game-breaking ability that Michigan just hasn't had from a whole lot of individuals so far this year.
I agree. My number 4 is Mason Graham. And when you have the talent that he has, we saw it last year against Minnesota. We saw it in the Nebraska game. He has the ability to take over a game from that defensive tackle position. That's a rare ability, and it's a rare talent. When you can affect the game in every way by rushing the quarterback, by flushing him out of the pocket, by stopping the run. I mentioned earlier, penetration will kill every single running style. If you can create penetration, and sometimes it's pushing the center back, which we've seen him do. Sometimes it's it's making him sit on the ball, and then you create a turnover. That CQ exchange, you can have an effect on a play that way, but it's just dominate up front. The Mason Graham is one of the guys that everybody is talking about as a top 10 talent in next year's NFL draft. If you're that top 10 talent from a defensive line position, you also have the ability to take over a game and dictate what an offense is going to do. And so you need more from Mason Graham.
Yeah, I agree. I agree even more. We'll get to him a little bit later, a bit more. For me, number 4 is Donovan Edwards. He has big game-breaking ability. And it was something we talked about when he became a captain, where I think a lot of players have the trajectory of going from leading by example, leading by production, and then finding their voice and being able to speak up and be there for players. And Donovan's had some incredible runs, but we have not seen him have to be the bell cow all that often. Down the stretch in 2022 when Blake Corum got hurt, he did, but he was, he was pretty fresh because Corum was taking up a lot of those carries, a lot of those opportunities. So we've seen it there. He can shoulder a load. He can come up with 20 plus touches in games. And again, not an individual, only him, everything else is humming along, but he's on the cover of the video game. He's one of the captains. He has the ability to put himself into a position where he's one of the top running backs to go in the NFL draft next year, but we haven't seen it yet. And adding some of that to this offensive attack would be massive to help Davis Warren, to help this offensive line gel, to help the receivers, all of it. I think offensively, he's as important as anybody right now.
Yeah, and I agree. You can't. It's about consistency. You can't just be big play Dono. You've got to be the guy that's good for 3 yards, for 5 yards, for 6 yards, 7 yards, that you can count on to get this run game going and start to create an identity offensively. My number 3 is Dom Jadis. And this, like you had for Tyler Morris in the wide receiver position, this is kind of more of an offensive line position. I wasn't going to just put one guy, the whole unit on here. But Dom's the guy, and there's a lot expected on him. Very inexperienced at center. He's coming over from defensive line, but he earned this position because of his athletic ability and his ability to block. But he's got to be a master communicator. He's the guy that connects both sides. He's the guy that gets everybody going in the right direction. And for those that enjoy the circus, I've used this analogy before. The offensive line most times has to look like elephants on parade. Everybody's stepping with the same foot. Everybody's doing the same techniques. That's where you build that trust, and that's where you build the ability to go out there and be a good offensive line. And I think Dom's ability to communicate right to left, get everybody going on the same page, is really one of the factors that can make number 5 Davis Warren better, and some of the other guys that I have coming up that will elevate their level of play as well.
Yeah. I didn't put Jadise or any offensive lineman on here just because, it was Jadise against Texas. We saw Greg Crippen some against Fresno State in the opener. Sherrone Moore won't be afraid to tweak, to make changes. And I don't know how much to buy into PFF grades and all of that when it comes to the offensive line. I lean on you and Jack Miller and others in that regard. But remember, around this time last year was the switch from Miles Hinton to Ladarius Henderson. This will be a continued competition. It's why, you can assume that the depth chart's going to stay the same, but it feels like this is a big week practice-wise for a lot of units, but in particular, that offensive line. If you want to make a potential, inroad as a backup on that O-line, this is probably one heck of a chance.
Well, it is. You're going to get opportunity, but it also makes your number 4, Donovan Edwards, more effective. It makes Davis Warren more effective. It makes Tyler Morris more effective. That offensive line has to be better.
For me, it's Davis Warren at number 3. And we don't have to belabor it. The one thing I will say, we talked about it a little bit on the 7 from 77. Talking with Kirk Campbell before the season, Davis Warren can run a 4.7 something 40. Like, he's in the 4.7s as a 40. He is not Alex Orji from a running athleticism standpoint, but he is not a necessary statue quarterback who just needs to stay in the pocket and can't move around. We saw a bit of that. I will be fascinated to see how that could be incorporated. Maybe not so much this week, but come USC, because the athleticism is there. It's a part of his game. And I wonder, as he gets more acclimated into the role, if we'll see more of it. And also the other thing I'll point out, Sherrone Moore said in his press conference that Jack Tuttle is, it looks like he could be back for this coming week. Not saying he's taking over the starting spot or some savior or anything, but continued competition, continued experience in that room. I think Davis Warren can straighten this out, but it's a big week for him, as it is for this entire offense. Case in point, my top 5 through 3 on the reverse unveiling are offensive players.
Yeah. And my number 2, you had it 4, Donovan Edwards. And it's not just about the consistency in the backfield. And this also includes the coaching staff. You got to get the ball in Donovan Edwards' hands in a number of different ways. He offers that as an offensive weapon. And so don't be locked into just, using him as a running back and handing him the ball. Don't be locked into just throwing him the ball as an outlet or a guy coming out of the backfield. Line him up at the slot, line him up at receiver. And we've seen it a couple of times here through 2 games, but you've got to be, he's a guy that can win on the edge. He can win one-on-one matchups. You can have him coming across the middle. He's a running back with extremely good hands. We saw that. We were introduced to it in his freshman year against Maryland. He set a record for running back receptions in a game. Use him in more creative ways and get the ball in his hands where he does have some space to roam and some space to do something with.
Totally agree. We've discussed it. We'll be really curious to see how it plays out this week and especially next week against USC. My number 2 is Kenneth Grant. And spoiler alert, my number 1 will also be on that defensive line. He's already been represented. So I'll kind of talk about both at this point. Michigan boasted so much talent last year, yet, especially I feel like in the playoff, we saw what the likes of Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham can do when it's just the 4 defensive linemen, when it's just those 2 bull rushing. They can affect the game in ways that doesn't necessarily involve schematics or other talent around them. They were wrecking balls against Alabama, and I think even more so against Washington. And we saw it all year, but boy, they waited. They saved their best for last. Mason Graham is getting top 10 conversation around him. Kenneth Grant, same range, if not maybe a little bit behind. If we're looking at, I think coaches sometimes have, people put too much on the coaches of saying, oh, well, they just need to scheme better, do this better, coach better, and it'll all work out. These are 2 guys where I don't really think you need to change anything coaching, anything game plan. They can make the impact, and they certainly have shown flashes so far. But for Michigan to reach their potential, they always needed the defense to at least be leading the way early as the offense got up to speed. And on the defense, teams can throw away from Will Johnson. They can't prevent Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant from getting to their quarterback unless their offensive line does it. It is scheme proof. It is game plan proof. It is talent based. Michigan has a chance to turn this season around to continue to dominate in Big Ten play if those two guys are able to dominate like they have the potential to do.
Yeah, I don't disagree, and they are at the center of the defense. They can have an impact on every single play. And my number one, who's on the edge of the defense, is Will Johnson. And I mean, yeah, teams can scheme and game plan away from Will Johnson. So if they're not going to throw the ball at him, and so be consistent, be that corner that teams just, hey, we're going to play on half of the field because we don't even want to throw at Will Johnson. It's basically what Texas did, and it was very successful. So the game plan, the blueprint is there. Now it's a matter of, okay, get with everybody else in that corner room. Don't just be a player coach. Help those guys. And you there's certain things that you can get from your coaches, and there's great value in that. But there's also value in hearing it from your teammates. This is how I do things. This is how I watch film. Get in there, coach the other guys up as well, because to whom much is given, much is expected. And Will Johnson has been gifted in the DNA realm of being an unbelievable athlete to being a very smart football player, a guy that was given great drive. And so use that to help all those other guys around you. And then also get with the coaching staff. If you could provide something offensively, I would love to see Will Johnson go to the coaching staff. And he may already have, and maybe it's something that they've got in the wings that just not ready to unveil yet, of play a little receiver. He's a big body. He's a tremendous athlete. We see it around college football, guys playing both ways. We've seen it with the same guy wearing the same number. Be an impact player and say, if I can help this team offensively, I want to make myself available.
Well, him playing offense would certainly open up some eyes. And the reason I didn't have Will Johnson on here from a defensive standpoint is just literally Texas said, yeah, forget that. We're throwing this other way.
Yeah.
So for me, if Will Johnson is to be number one on this list, it means the likes of Zeke Berry and Makari Page and all these other members of the secondary, they're doing their jobs at a level that forces defenses to say, all right, we can't just not throw Will Johnson's way. Now,
right.
Quinn Ewers, I think, has a very good chance to be the best quarterback Michigan faces this year. And this offense as a whole feels like it. And if Michigan just does 50th percentile of what they've done the last 3 years on third down, Texas still wins the game, but it's not a blowout. So we'll see how it goes. But yeah, to me, if you're right, if Will Johnson is the key guy, that makes me feel a lot better about what the rest of the secondary has developed.
Yeah, and the key for this entire team is the story is not written. All right, 2 chapters are in the books. We know what you did against Fresno State in all 3 phases. We know what you did against Texas in all 3 phases. But the story is not finished. What are you going to do individually as a team to go out there and get better against Arkansas State, to get better and play better and get a win against USC, to go out there? I mean, I was a part of a team in 97 that we won the national championship. We came back, we lost our first 2 games. So they've already started off better than we did in 1998, and we won a share of the Big Ten title. It is all out there to be had, but individuals have to play better, coaches have to coach better, and it all starts from the top down. And it's going to be the leadership of Sherrone Moore that will ultimately decide whether this ship is righted or not.
Few questions from viewers before we get out of here today. From Jeff, do we have an identity yet? I think it's fair to say no. What can that identity be to you?
Well, it needs to be a physical. It has to be a physical, violent brand of football. And defensively, it's being able to win up front. 2 guys that were on both of our list are Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham. That was the biggest surprise as to how Texas was able to handle them, as well as Derek Moore and Josiah Stewart. These guys, we've seen them play good against good offensive lines. Go back to the Rose Bowl. That was the group that had the 4th down stop. Now, you've got to be able to translate that from year to year, game to game, and continue to improve. But it's got to be a physical, violent brand of football, swarming to the ball defensively. Tackle better. That's one of the things Wink talked about, Sherrone's talked about all week. You've got to be able to tackle. But offensively, you've got to find that identity. And this is a program. This is an offense that is built on being able to run the football. And I only know one way of being able to run the football, and that's with violence up front. And until you can be violent up front, until you can be comfortable and confident and be able to come off the ball with explosion, you're going to struggle. And that's in all phases.
From Light Lime, do you guys understand what the offense is trying to accomplish based on the play calling? I would certainly encourage fans to check out the Monday Night Radio show on the podcast feed. Kirk Campbell was on with Jon, talked for about 15 minutes, and certainly schematically, I mean, there was some admitting of, yeah, we got to play better, we got to do better. Of course, absolutely. I did get the sense that Kirk Campbell feels it's close with Davis. I did get the sense from Sherrone Moore on that same show that he was very disappointed with his offensive line. He didn't say that emphatically, but based on reading kind of how Sherrone answers in those spots, I think it'll be a rough week in the film room and on the practice field for the O-line. So that's the kind of preface to you of, what do you think, where's the gap between play calling and what they're trying to accomplish and what they've been able to execute through 2 weeks?
Well, ultimately, it's about execution, but you also have to call plays that you have the confidence and the players have the confidence that they can actually execute. And at some point, you're going to, throughout the course of a game, you hope it's a minimal amount of times, you're going to be in third and long situations. If you have tackles that can't hold up in pass protection at that point, then you're going to be forced to put a running back there. You're going to be forced to put a tight end, something to help put the defense, the edge rusher back on the tackle. That's one thing. And in regards to the scheme, it's obviously it's clear that, and Sherrone has talked about this, Kirk Campbell's the one that's calling the plays. I think Sherrone Moore needs to be more involved in the calls game day, because over the last 3 years, we've seen them completely change course in the middle of a game, whether it's going in Penn State, going to, running the ball because you couldn't hold up in pass protection and you do it 37 times in a row. It's being able to have a rhythm offensively or a scheme offensively that you're running things in the first quarter that are setting things up for just something you want to do just before halftime or in the third and fourth quarters. That's where I think this team, this offensive right now game plan is lacking.
From P. Maximus, with all the spring and fall camp hype, where is Cole Cabana, Amorion Walker, Marlon Klein? From a running back standpoint, I've liked what I've seen from Ben Hall. He feels to be that third running back, and I expect to see him a decent amount here coming up. Certainly if Michigan takes care of business against Arkansas State, it could be a great opportunity for several guys to get some run. Marlon Klein, curious your thoughts on him. I feel like as a pass catcher, it's going to be tough for Marlon Klein to get a whole lot going just because of the type of receiver player Colston Loveland is. And Amorion Walker, I think everything's open and available from a receiver core standpoint.
Yeah. For Cole Cabana, I think that it's just he's too far down the depth chart. I think it's Ben Hall, as we saw against Texas. He got some run. I think the next guy is going to be Jordan Marshall. That's going to be in the game. So I think he's just down the depth chart. And then for Marlon Klein, that's where I would like to see, if he is one of the fastest guys on the team, then why not, split him out? They find ways to get Colston Loveland the ball. Do the same thing with Marlon Klein. You can create mismatches. You can create opportunities for him. Same thing with Amorion Walker. If nothing else, hey, line them up. Hey, with number one, you're trips left. You're the only one to the right, and just go deep. We've got to show that we have somebody that can burn past a corner, and then at some point you've got to test that weapon to see if it actually will work. But I think both of those guys, Walker and Klein, we've seen Marlon Klein on the field quite a bit. But he just hasn't been a target in the pass game.
Last call for any questions from those watching. Just asking about Jack Tuttle. Why is he not even discussed? I think he is discussed internally. I think it's been health-based. But, yeah, I mean, Sherrone Moore is not going to just enshrine one person as the starting quarterback no matter what at every position. So I think it would be a very good sign for Jack Tuttle if he's able to be out there in uniform coming up on Saturday. And hopefully if Michigan can take care of business in this one, and they're, pretty significant favorites here, maybe if he can play, he can go out there and get an opportunity to knock off some rust. And then who knows from there? I mean, you always hear about teams needing two, And I mean, Michigan's going to need multiple quarterbacks here. They've already used multiple quarterbacks.
Yeah, and it was really just health based. We made conversation about it with the coaches on Monday night. Hey, we saw we saw Jack Tuttle warming up. How close is he to being ready to play? And it's if he's 100% healthy, he's a guy that is a 7th-year guy. He was behind Michael Penix at Indiana, who ended up obviously being a first-round pick. He was behind JJ here. So he's always been covered up by a good talent. Now maybe is the time to, if we're struggling offensively, to go with a more experienced quarterback.
Yeah, no doubt. One more question here. Tyler W. Where did the diversity go in the running game? Pins and pulls, stretch, try until something sticks. Your thoughts on if that could potentially, just your thoughts on kind of the variety that Michigan's using the run game.
Well, Tyler, I mean, I kind of said the same thing in that Fresno State game where not much was happening between the tackles until they made the switch to Khalil Mullins later in the game, fourth quarter more specifically. And I do think against Texas, there were some times where they were working to get out on the edges a little bit more. But I'm with you. If I'm not a proponent of we're gonna make this what we're doing, and that's running between the tackles. Fresno State was loading the box against Michigan. They always had one, if not two, extra players in the box, and Michigan was having a hard time running between the tackles. And I also don't subscribe to it started to work in the fourth quarter. Well, that's great, but what about the second and third quarters? There are other things that you can do. Donovan Edwards, you can get him the ball on the edge. Samaj Morgan could be a part of the run game. Khalil Mullins, Ben Hall, they all have the ability to get to the edge. And one of the things that I showed on Jansen Vision on the Sunday morning show, Dom Jadis, one of the guys, I mean, he is a guy that earned the starting spot because he does provide a little bit more athletic ability. He can pull from that center position, which means you can get an extra blocker out front on the edge. We saw him, pull and block end of the line of scrimmage. So why not get him outside as well? I'm with you, Tyler. I think that's why I want Sherrone Moore to be more a part of calling the plays on game day. I think he is more willing to not abandon a concept, but tweak it, and we could still run the ball, but let's see if we can press it on the outside.
All right, that'll do it for another streaming edition of In the Trenches. Again, Makari Page coming up on the audio version, which will be released Wednesday morning. We'll have John's Keys of the Game Thursday afternoon. John, I'm sure you're pretty tired. I know you didn't sleep very well Saturday after the Texas game, and I guess you didn't sleep a whole lot at all after the Lions game Sunday night. So
not much last night either, because it was an NFC foe facing off against a former NFC foe, obviously the San Francisco 49ers against Aaron. And I was kind of hoping that the Jets would be able to pull one out because it would help us. But, boy, San Francisco looks good. So could be another rematch. Jordan
Mason's a wrecking ball. That was whew.
That's a Kyle Shanahan offense. Insert running back and be explosive. It's the same. It was the same thing with his dad in Denver. So, but a lot of late nights, but I can accept the low sleep when it's all football based.
All right. Well, again, super thankful for those who are tuning in. Another great edition here of In the Trenches presented by Meyer. We're hoping it's penciled in this time next week. Jason Avant to stop by, talk about number eight. Unhinged. We might have to get the 7-second delay on.
Where's the dump button?
I'll have to work on this. This is a new thing for us. I'll have to make sure I got everything squared away. Now, Jason will be on his best behavior as long as Michigan takes care of business on Saturday, which we expect. John will tell you how Michigan can do it with his Keys of the Game coming up Thursday on the podcast feed. Defend the Block had a great conversation with me and LJ Kaysen, a young man who's really making some inroads on the basketball side of things as an incoming freshman who was committed to FAU. I mean, he would have been a straight baller for FAU, and he's got a chance, I think, to be a good one here at Michigan in his career. Conquering Heroes, Brandon Naurato, awesome conversation John had with the coach of Michigan hockey entering his third season off of Frozen 4. Excited about that conversation as well. So subscribe to Michigan Athletics YouTube. Send us a like here. Subscribe to MGO Blue Podcasts. Good to go, John. Appreciate it as always, man.
Thanks a lot. Go Blue.